Wow, okay, with Death Stranding 2 just released, those who haven't tried these games are being reminded of them again, how weird or unique they appear at a glance, and are maybe wondering if they might like them. I wondered that too, given my tastes are very particular and my gaming skills are also particularly limited. But a few weeks back, I finally gave Death Stranding Director's Cut a proper try. The experience and emotions that came with it are fresh on my mind. I actually ended up recording thoughts about the game on 3 different occasions that I'm kind of clumsily stitching together for you here to hopefully help you figure out if this might be a series worth your trying. I have started playing Death Stranding 2. I am enjoying it. Those thoughts are coming, but I'm going to focus my thoughts on Death Stranding Director's Cut for the moment. And if you're watching the video version, I'm just using general open world footage in the background to avoid spoilers, though later on I will get into spoiler territory before a clear warning. You can also check the timestamps of the video for more on when that will happen. So, settle in. I've got a lot to say. I've put 76 hours into it, just playing the main story, not doing hardly any side quests. I think other players that are better than me will get through it faster. I like to take my time. I'm pretty careful as a player. I would have loved to have done more optional side quest content, really grind up some of my options for resources and equipment, but I didn't do that. Looking forward to getting back to that. Anyway, let me give my thoughts on this game. First, the basic premise. This takes place in a dystopian future, not post-apocalyptic quite, because there's plenty of greenery, even though there's also plenty of black, stark-looking rocks and sand and stuff. But it's kind of a contrast between those 2 types of environments at first, and then later some snowy mountains and stuff like that. But there was a catastrophic event that took out a ton of Earth's population, and those that remain are living very isolated from each other. Most of them living underground in some kind of vault-type things. But they still need supplies. Not everyone can be subsistence farmers and be completely self-sustaining, so they have to have some kind of means of trading with each other, communicating with each other. And so the remnants of the American government are trying to reconnect these surviving cities and establish some kind of a society that can reconnect, and in doing so help each other to survive, help humanity to move forward into whatever future it may have. But you've got you got forces that are opposed to that. A couple of mysterious characters, one that is definitely opposed to what you are doing and seems bent on actually just kind of taking humanity the rest of the way to the doom that they almost hit with this big event. And so you've got to make your way through all kinds of opposition. There's also, because of this catastrophic event, this connection between the physical world and the spiritual world, specifically the world of the dead or the recently dead. It's not exactly a connection to the afterlife, but almost like a connection to the shortly afterlife. And those that are those spirits or beings or whatever that are still hanging around in that space, they are not friendly. And so you need to try and get around them, sneak past them, which can be tricky because they're invisible unless you're standing still and taking note of your special devices, and you're reading your little spinning doohickey that points in the direction of the nearest one of these creatures called BTs. And so you have to sneak past them from time to time. But a lot of I'll get to the gameplay in a second here. Let me just talk about this world, though, and the presentation. It's a very striking visual design. As I said, it has these stark, contrasting visual concepts like lush greenery and very kind of vacant, dead-looking surroundings as well. It's a pretty serious tone overall, although it could be considered melodramatic at times. And also has some rare, odd, fourth-wall breaking moments and other bits of arguably out-of-place humor that may make you wonder if you saw what you think you just saw, or you heard them say what you think you heard them say. But those are pretty rare. I'd say generally the tone is very serious, which I appreciate. The connection between the worlds of the living and the dead are represented in some almost Lovecraftian visions, not in the squid face sense, but just being eerie, and like you don't quite see what the weirdness is. These BTs are humanoid in shape roughly, but you don't get to see them very clearly. So if you have fear of the unknown, if you are unsettled by the unknown or the unknowable in horror, I think you're going to have those vibes certainly here in some of the visions that are presented to you. It's not a horror game, but it has some horror design elements that are mixed into the dystopian sci-fi. Again, contrasting nicely with the lush green environments that are regularly being pattered with rain. As far as the story goes, it's heavy on cutscenes in the opening hours and especially the closing hours, but most of the game they are comparatively more sparse, though still regular. I think that some people, like I was the first time I tried this game, may grow impatient with the cutscenes because of their length, especially early on and maybe toward the end of the game as well. If you're not connecting with the story, then that could be a point of frustration. That was a big problem for me the first time I tried this a handful of years ago, and I was just so impatient. I thought my first impressions of the story was, this is weird, I don't like this, and I hate the cutscene format for telling stories in video games. I'm much more interested in an interactive story like The Elder Scrolls, where I'm not suddenly being passive and sitting back and watching your precious cutscene play out. I hate that format. But for some reason, when I came back to this game recently, I was ready for kind of like a more passive experience. I was in a place where I wasn't quite sure what kind of game I wanted to play, or do I want to watch a show? Hey, here's the thing that's kind of a little bit of both, so let's give this a try. So I was more open to it, unusually so for me, this time around. But I can see that being a point of frustration for some, but just know, I think they're more heavy early on and then very, very late in the game, and otherwise they are not getting in the way near as much. My first impressions of the story was that it was allegory. It's some weird allegory because people have names like Die Hard Man and Hartman and Dead Man, and there's reasons that are about their backstory that they have these names or these nicknames. They're not called nicknames. So I'm like, what is this weird world where suddenly people are being called these things? This is very weird. And your character's name is Sam Porter Bridges, and you are trying to help rebuild America like Uncle Sam, and you are a porter taking packages from one place to another, and you are building connections between people, like bridges. And so it's really, really on the nose. And because of all this stuff, my first impression was like, I don't know. I like visually what I'm seeing, but this writing is weird. But after a while, I felt like the characters were not as weird as my first impression of them led me to think. That they had some backstories, they had personalities that I could get interested in, get invested in, especially Sam. So let's see here. Like I said, the story threads include trying to restore connectivity and society while trying to stop a mysterious villain from kind of ending it all. There's also this mystery man that you keep dreaming about while you're hooked up to your bridge baby, which is this unborn baby that's strapped in a little transparent tank on your chest that is part of a series of these babies that the Bridges company created to help people navigate safely around BTs. Because when you're hooked up to these BBs, these bridge babies, I know it also sounds like baby, which they are. They're unborn babies. But somehow they're able to have some kind of connection between the living and the dead. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And so you have this thing strapped to your chest, and when you connect to it in a particular way after resting, you have these dreams, these visions of this man that you don't know. So anyway, and there's other little mini mysteries that start out as random oddities that, like, I was like, this is all a bunch of weird stuff. Is this like one of those dumb TV shows that just like Lost that presents a bunch of weird stuff that it's never going to explain? Well, by the end, I felt like the mysteries that I wanted answers to, they were explained. Even some mysteries that I forgot about. I was like, oh yeah, there was that weird thing. I forgot all about that. And now here I'm finally getting the explanation for it. Okay, great. Thank you, So by the end, I didn't feel like it was this weird for the sake of being weird kind of story. That it did have explanations and thought for most of it, at least the things that I wanted answers to. But it's still, though, at times I felt ahead of the story, and other times I felt behind. Partly due, I think, to some, at least perceived by me, incoherence in logic or overly vague ideas in the presented lore as it's being revealed. So, like, the way I tracked with the story, either ahead of it or feeling a little bit lost when I felt like they thought I knew what they were talking about. It made for a bumpy ride at times. But by the end, I felt like I had a reasonable handle on all I wanted to understand about the story and characters. I may be incorrect on some details if I were to have a conversation with another fan of the game, but I feel okay enough with my understanding of the game. And I also had to pay attention and think, so it definitely doesn't spoon-feed you stuff, but I think it's understandable to a satisfying degree. But the clunkiness of some storytelling as well, I want to say, is a price that I do gladly pay, in this case, for the striking uniqueness of the vision. And that's actually something I can relate to as a price being paid from the creator side of things. Similarly, with my audio dramas, the Spirit Blade trilogy, you can get info at spiritblade.com. I went in some wild directions, mashing up all kinds of different ideas. It's kind of crazy stuff in the Spirit Blade trilogy that I still don't really see being done or mashed up or played with in the same way, to the same degree, with the same kind of wildness and concept. I don't really see that elsewhere still, but there's some bumpy things about that story and my writing and stuff like that that are not as strong, you know. And so I think when you have a creative vision that's being pretty much driven, carried out largely by one person, who's either doing it all themselves, like it was mostly in my case, but with the help of a bunch of actors and stuff, or in the case of Kojima, you have a big team, but you are just really hands-on. I get the impression with him. Then what that's going to mean is that there's going to be some bumpiness. There's going to be some weakness in some areas, but the trade-off is if they have an interesting vision and they're doing some interesting creative things, then you're only going to get those kinds of things from something created in that way. And so I've not played any other Kojima games up to this point because the Metal Gear Solid games, I was just like, I feel like I'm way too far behind to get caught up on all that craziness. But I do wonder if going forward I might be a fan of Kojima, not in the sense that like I'm going to love everything he does and say every part of the story and the execution is all brilliant, but in the sense of like, dang, I see some of the bumpiness, but holy crap, I will take it in trade for just the uniqueness and the striking nature of these other ideas and the presentations of them that you're just not going to get in AAA gaming that's overly focus tested or AA gaming that still isn't being led by, a really strong singular vision. So pros and cons, but I'll take them. I gradually became very invested in Sam, the main character, especially as more of his past is revealed. By the end of his journey, I cared about him so much that the final moments, just playing them earlier today, had me with tears streaming down my face. So Death Stranding joins the rare company of a mere handful of games in my entire life, or less, whose stories I've found not only interesting, which I usually don't find video game stories interesting at all, I just want to rush through them. But not only did I find this one interesting, I found it emotionally powerful. I think the last time I actually cried, tears streaming down my face, was maybe the first Spider-Man video game. Anyway, yeah, really left an impression. Now, in this particular case, my mileage, I have to say, was greatly improved by being a father. Fatherhood, parenthood, major component of the drama, the themes in this story. The concept of bridge babies, the game mechanics that increasingly encourage the players and Sam's attachment to his bridge baby greatly supported my emotional investment in the story and the themes of being a parent and a father specifically. So I got to say that if you're not a parent, then there's certain elements that just probably won't connect with you in the same way, almost as a guarantee. But let me talk about the gameplay now. This is, in a nutshell, I guess this physics... Well, not in a nutshell. I'm going to talk for a bit. It's a physics-incorporating, open-world travel and exploration game where you are moving goods and materials from A to B in a big open world environment via the most efficient route that you determine for yourself, because there's no roads and stuff. You got to figure out what's the best way to get from A to B with all this stuff in the middle that you're passing through. You're passing over and through rocky terrain, running water of different depths and speeds, steep incline and declines, a sort of acid rain that deteriorates your cargo containers and equipment, while you're also trying to avoid or sneak past or defeat these ghostly enemies that you can only see while standing still, or human enemies that will detect and hunt you down from far off. For each trip, you need to consider how to stack your cargo or distribute its weight across your body, because piling it too high on your back makes balance difficult. And you'll notice that you'll start wobbling and maybe fall over, which can do damage to your cargo. So when that wobbling starts to happen, you'll get a prompt that says, like, hey, hold on to the right trigger for a minute or for a few seconds to rebalance yourself to the right, because you're starting to lean left. That's the main thing you use, is those trigger buttons to correct yourself when you start wobbling to the left or to the right. But most of the time I actually just defaulted toward holding both, because that's kind of a way that you can constantly be focusing on balance. It uses up more stamina, but on the lower difficulty I was using, I don't think that made it near as much of an issue. But it still felt right. It felt immersive. The mechanics of the game pull me into the world with the balancing. It's not frustrating like I thought it could potentially be. Instead, it's pulling me into the world. You also have, of course, a limited amount of total weight that you can carry, and you have to choose what equipment to 3D print for yourself to help with each trek, which can include things like portable ladders, ropes, bridges you can kind of auto-construct on the fly, generators to help recharge the equipment you're using, different types of shelters, and much more in order to deal with the various obstacles in the world. You can also eventually create vehicles and road systems, and leave other fixtures in the world to help yourself with repeat travels over similar areas. So much more could be said about the gameplay, for which I'll refer you to the many reviews out for this game now. But in a nutshell, if I can try, the gameplay is about trying to anticipate troubles you might encounter based on the knowledge you're given at the start of a mission, and then stock up accordingly given the limited weight capacity that you have and the resources you have and the cargo you actually have to carry to fulfill the mission. In some ways, it's that same sort of push-your-luck feel of dungeon crawls, where you try to stock up before a delve and then hope you can get as far as you're intending to before your supplies run out. And in Death Stranding, you can take your time with plenty of optional missions or just your own exploring out in the open world to build up your resources, bring them back, and use those to 3D print things, make sure you have all the supplies you could possibly want. So if you're patient, you can sort of grind for resources to make missions easier. That, or you can dial the difficulty to the lowest setting, which is intended to allow even non-gamers to be able to get to the end of the game. And while it doesn't make you completely unkillable, it did go a long way to smooth out what could have been some frustrating gameplay for me, particularly the handful of boss fights, which it made wildly easy compared to the required strategies I would read about in walkthroughs that were geared toward the standard difficulty. So just by way of example, I beat the final boss in probably less than 2 minutes without taking any damage. And that's what I wanted. I don't like it when games suddenly change up mechanics and do require something very different of me. It's in a very intense moment that I've not been prepared for, that I've not been practicing up to that point. So all that to say, if the world or story of Death Stranding have looked interesting to you in videos of the game, don't let potential difficulty keep you from giving Death Stranding a try. I suck at games, and I get frustrated with difficulty easily, having very little patience for it, and I never felt like I hit a wall in this game. Now, that said, it did become a little frustrating to me in the last 10 hours or so as abilities that I've come to rely on are taken away for hours at a time, for like a whole episode and a series of missions. And there's also boss fights that really ramp up in frequency near the end that involve a very different style of gameplay than what I enjoy and have become practiced at. The easiest difficulty And looking at written walkthroughs did make the boss fights pretty easy, though they still felt intense feeling because of the presentation. Very kind of set-piece, crazy, epic moments with these creatures you're up against, that just the aesthetics made it feel intense. Even though when I finished with the boss fight, I was like, oh, I don't even know if I took any damage at all, but it felt intense at the time. However, the lack of ability to detect BTs, which are the invisible enemies of the game that can kill you very quickly if you're not careful and aware of them, losing the ability to be aware of where they were standing for a while made it feel mandatory for me to closely follow walkthroughs for about 6 missions in a row in order to avoid what would have been frustrating repetition. However, on a second playthrough, taking all the time in the world to build up traversal route options, I think I could get through these things without a walkthrough. I think I'd probably like to give that a try. I just didn't like feeling like I had to use them. Walkthroughs the first time through, and when you die, you sort of respawn. It's your equipment gets dropped, and so you kind of have to go pick it up again or whatever. And you don't get set back super far, but I mean it is a little bit of a setback. It still has that video gamey feel of, oh crap, okay, I have to do this again, you know. All right, so that's gameplay. Let me talk about themes, though, specifically from my perspective as a Christian. A major theme here is the urgent need for humanity to reconnect with each other relationally instead of being so isolated. Now, this game was made pre-COVID, so I do not think this is it would not be a commentary on any kind of separation that COVID helped encourage or bring about. But rather, I think this was a commentary on what was already happening because of the internet and social media in particular prior to COVID. And how the internet and social media have facilitated this strange, isolated tribalism. Where we want to, we feel safe when we're detached and not talking directly with people in the room. And yet we really want to find our tribes, and we want to find out, what do you think about this? Okay, I can't be in the same group with you. I'm not going to be on that page. I'm not going to be in that online group. I'm not going to be in that Discord server because they think this, and so I can't be there, you know. So we draw these strange dividing lines, even as, you know, so we're very particular about who we kind of want to quote-unquote be with, even though we're not really with anybody. It's kind of a weird thing. We're strangely disconnected, even as in some ways we are superficially more connected than ever. It's also a value of the game for us to reconnect as humans for the sake of humanity's continued existence, as though it will ultimately be the death of us if we don't learn to relationally connect again. I think that's true in the sense of conflict resolution. I think our ability to have conversations with people that we disagree with, and for those to be conversations in which we are curious and interested, instead of like planting our feet and feeling defensive and like we have to be in a debate mode or something because we disagree with this person. You know, we've lost the ability, or it's atrophied to a great degree, to have a conversation with somebody that we very strongly disagree with them on some particular issue, without that feeling super tense and like, oh man, this is too stressful to be around this person because we see things so differently, you know. We've got to learn how to relationally connect again with people that we have differing views on. It's just healthy to be able to do that, because that's how you actually can understand more ideas that are out there in the free marketplace of thinking and thought. So you can properly test your thinking, develop your thinking, while factoring in other ideas and other information, you know. So, and we've lost the art of healthy conflict resolution because we just so easily avoid it, and we don't deal with it because of so much of our interactions being online and stuff. So there's a lot of conflict that is caused by the fact that we've kept ourselves so isolated, and we've got to learn how to relationally connect again. Otherwise, those times where we are connecting together in person, and because we're so unpracticed, conflict becomes so much more difficult to navigate. So I think there is real danger. Especially the more and more potentially in the future our world leaders have grown up with that kind of atrophying capacity for conflict resolution. That does not bode well for people who have control of the big red button in the fancy office. So this is maybe more serious than we think. But on another level, this idea of the necessity, the importance of connecting relationally is so consistent with Scripture. Paul continually in his letters expresses his desire to be with those he is writing to, sometimes saying, I would write more now, but I really want to just be with you in person. I want to talk to you about this in person. There's a real desire to be with those he's writing to. He's not content. It's not enough for him to just be writing to them from afar. And it's also important in the New Testament. It's stated for Christians to continue meeting together and living life alongside each other. And Jesus said we'd be known as his disciples by the way we love each other. What we tend to want to do is to subdivide and identify ourselves and others based on ideological positions and stances. And Christians do this too, as though it's most important we be known for our stances on issues rather than our love for each other. So while unintended, certainly, I think the message of this game to connect or face the consequences of watching humanity die out, I think it could also serve as a metaphor for Christians to relationally connect and remain relationally connected in local church communities, or else watch much of the church die out. I think this game can serve as a reminder for us if we will allow it to. There's also the immense value given to the unborn in this game. That was one of the first themes that really I noticed started coming to the surface, and I couldn't believe I was seeing this. It feels like the writing of this game, or at least those elements, is coming from some form of pro-life convictions that are strongly held to. I hate to even use the term pro-life because that has a lot of baggage, but if we consider that as like a spectrum of people just having landing in different places, different particularities, I think there's some form of quote-unquote pro-life thinking that is driving the writing and the values of this game, whether the writer would identify themselves with that terminology or not. Players are meant to become emotionally attached to the unborn BB that they are carrying around with them. It's really strong, I think. Fatherhood is also very emotionally represented and valued. Motherhood as well, to a lesser but still very strong degree, in particularly a major subplot. There are more subtle ways that the writing overlaps with values of biblical Christianity, but certainly ways that it does not overlap. It strikes me as the writing of someone who has some strong moral convictions and ideas about what should be important in life, but someone who at the same time does not have any objective foundation on which to ground those values, making appeals to the virtues they think are important that are largely emotionally based and lacking supporting reasoning or argumentative substance. It also certainly toys with ideas of life after death, but so much of that stuff is just wildly imaginative and relativistic, loosely stringing together various real-world ideas with the thinnest of possible strands, pardon the pun. Even so, it doesn't claim much that's definitive in this regard in the realm of the supernatural. And the afterlife elements are more like the way station of afterlife rather than exploring concepts of eternal destiny. In any case, though very present, the supernatural elements don't seem to be present to directly make a statement compared to, say, the other themes already mentioned, which I think do seem more intended to make a subtle statement of some kind. Hideo Kojima, the game's auteur director, recently was quoted as being concerned that pre-release feedback of Death Stranding 2 was too positive. I found that very interesting. In his mind, he said something along these lines: games that people truly love are the ones they at first didn't enjoy completely and were maybe somewhat frustrated with, which leads then, in his mind, to a journey of even greater appreciation and devotion and love for this thing later on, as it kind of finally clicks for them, maybe. Now that's not always true for me, as I just kind of sum up my thoughts here about Death Stranding. That scenario is not always true for me, but I can say that a few of my all-time favorite games did start out as ones that stretched me as a player, stressed me out, even frustrated me. The same was true with Death Stranding, which I did not connect with even 10 plus hours in the first time I tried it. But when I came back to it recently, just 2-3 weeks ago, I started over from the beginning, gave it my complete focus. Like I said earlier, I was kind of in a different place of wanting something different and wanting to just kind of try something that was going to be different from anything else on the market. And so I gave it my complete focus, and before long, I was wondering what the crap was wrong with me the first time I tried it out, because Death Stranding quickly became one of the most memorable games I've ever played, and one of the few in recent memory in the last few years that I have mainlined and not touched any other game until I finished my experience with the game I'm playing. That's not normal for me these days, but I was all in on nothing but Death Stranding pretty much from beginning to end when I gave it another try a couple of weeks ago. And while I've already installed Death Stranding 2 and am eager to get started, and we'll hopefully have some comments on the Christian Geek Central podcast for that pretty soon, I am glad to know that when I finished the first Death Stranding, it gave me the opportunity to go back out into the open world and finish the many, many optional quests that I skipped, with tons of room to create my own objectives. Even after being victorious, there is still a post-game world out there with roads that need building, supplies to deliver, and lots of new places, people, and quests for me to still discover. I may still be playing Death Stranding for a long time to come. Okay, so now I want to specifically dive into the thematic elements of Death Stranding Director's Cut that hit me like an emotional freight train. In large part, I think, because I'm both a father of 2 boys and a Christian. I'm going to keep story elements as vague as I can on the first pass through talking about these elements. Then, in the video version of this content, I'll let you know when I'll be talking spoilers. On the Christian Geek Central podcast, I'll just put all my spoilery thoughts after the credits at the end of the episode. Okay, so I was haunted by this game in a way that I've not been haunted by entertainment for a long time. I mean, haunted in this weird, sort of almost melancholy, bittersweet type of emotional zone that I was in for days. A lot of it had to do with BB's theme just going through my mind, and I was just tearing up at random times. Not random, it was when I was thinking about this game or the song or something like that. Just for days, it's like, man, I could cry on cue if you asked me to. The themes that I think come up so strongly by the end of this game, one would be that this theme of babies and children and how they can be difficult to bring along with you in various life activities as a parent when they're just babies. Their whining and their crying can be a pain or a source of stress and irritation. But if you ever ask yourself as a parent, do I wish I didn't have them? Do I wish they would go away? Do I wish they were dead? I think the obvious emphatic answer is no. You can't fathom living without them, or you can't fathom losing them. You want to protect them and hold them. You'd do anything to keep them safe. Near the end of the game, they take a recurring musical theme representing a lullaby heard throughout the game, and they present it in a new way that is beautiful and epic and conveys the hugeness of a parent's love, and also suggests, I think, so close to the end where this moment falls, that this relational connection is the most important and significant of all relational connections given focus in the story. Yes, there's that broad theme of connecting relationally to others, but this is like the culmination of that theme, the connection of parent to child. And that's when the tears first started coming for me. It was late in the game, at the very end almost, and it's powerful, and it put the whole game into a different perspective for me. And that connection in life really has probably the largest impact on the health of all of our relationships, and so much else in our lives. The whole way we relate to other people, that is established because of how we relate or don't relate to our parents. I had a conversation with the senior pastor at our church a year or so back, just kind of reflecting on different situations in our church over the years that were difficult, that involved people leaving for different reasons and stuff. And just as an elder on our church board, thinking about the health of the church, I was talking to him about that. I was trying to figure out, is there a common denominator, something that we could be aware of that would help us to navigate these situations and hopefully not result in people unnecessarily leaving because of conflict or disagreement that's unable to be resolved. And he didn't propose some simple solution or anything, but he did, make the observation that in all the particular situations that we were kind of looking at on the table, there was dad stuff going on. There was in these people's lives, in their past, in various ways, dad stuff that left scars, that left complexities in the way they related and handled conflict and stuff like that. There is so much about the relationship between parents and children that is formative to all other relationships in life. And so the love of a loving father has massive power and impact, and it is so treasured and celebrated at the end of this game. And as I was reflecting on that, it didn't take long at all for me to then consider that an earthly father's love for his children is just the beginning and just a conversation starter for understanding God's love for you and for me. Scripture often refers to God as Father and makes those comparisons between earthly fathers and their children and God and us as His children. And so it's an intended parallel in Scripture that we're meant to consider. And so in reflecting on that, I mean, it just became all the more powerful, this game, in my mind. And I don't think that was intended at all by the creator. I think a lot of things that I was pulling out of this game probably, and the things that I was feeling and why I was feeling them were not intended. But it's beautiful nonetheless. The end of the game also alludes, I think, to the complexities of dysfunctional or tense relationships between grown sons and their fathers, even relationships involving conflict. And yet it underscores the love at the foundations of most of those relational complexities. So really appreciated that. I think some of that probably was intended. The post-game puts you back in the world before a key cutscene and your final delivery mission, and even though Death Stranding 2 continues Sam's story in a very satisfying way, I'm still so happy to come back and to jump back and forth, as I still am, between these two games, to be able to roam the world of Death Stranding 1 with Sam and BB taking care of all the remaining side quests and the objectives that I want to. But, traveling the world with BB, I love it. And as a side note, I love this kind of open world game design that makes the main story reasonable to get through without feeling bloated, and then it gives me a ton of optional stuff that doubles my playtime or more if I want it to. When a game does that, I don't know yet if it's doubling my playtime, we'll see, but when a game is structured like that and lets you decide how much you really want to put into it, I love that, and it works really well here. There is now like a sweetness to this part of Sam's story in the open world, traveling around doing side quests, where he and BB are traveling together. It reminds me a little of the sweetness I feel thinking back on the long gone years for us now, in which our boys were little babies that we carried around through our lives, through our routines. It was a tough time in many ways, for sure, but it was a sweet time in other ways to look back on. And as I reflect on that, I just long to be face to face with the God who loves me even far more than I love my boys. As I reflect back on my love for my boys, both now and as I think about the memories I've had with them because of Death Stranding, such powerful emotions come to mind. And then I consider, my gosh, my God loves me so much more even than I love my boys. Wow. And in fact, in light of this game, I was praying this week that God would grant for my boys to one day have kids of their own and then have a moment like this that they share with me so that I can say, okay, yes, that's how much I love you. Do you get it now? And now imagine, my boy, how much more God loves us. I want that kind of moment with my boys after playing this game. I've said before that any entertainment experience that makes you grateful for someone or leads you to hug someone or want to love someone more and better, that's a good entertainment experience. That's a worthwhile one. And on top of that, of course, I'm loving the free-form post-story gameplay of optimizing my delivery methods and building and crafting in the world. So yeah, Death Stranding, I can say now, has officially become one of my favorite games of all time. Okay, time to wrap up by getting into full-on spoilers for Death Stranding Director's Cut, in particular to talk about the themes that had a big impact on me. That's your first and last warning. Spoilers ahead. Here we go. Okay. I wondered at some point if the visions Sam was seeing were actually his own memories, and he was the BB in the flashbacks, which is what was revealed. And it wasn't for me the belly scar that made me wonder that. It was just kind of like creative speculation on my part, but it wasn't something I felt confident of. But the power of this choice, man, we realize that Cliff Unger wants his baby back, and he is at violent odds with his grown son in pursuit of getting his baby back. As our kids become teenagers and young adults, it's common to have some wistful memories of when they were tiny and less complicated, less complex people. Maybe especially when we're at odds with them as grown-up kids in a moment. And I feel like this in some ways illustrates that like Cliff is wanting his baby back, and yet he ironically is fighting with his grown son while he's struggling to gain back what he lost, this time that has passed of this baby. That in the story he lost because it was because he died and it was taken from him. But in just our day-to-day lives, one way or another, our kids grow up, and so that time is that time is taken away by time itself. And then from Sam's perspective, all he sees is this man trying to kill him, not recognizing that Cliff's misguided violence is ironically rooted in his love for Sam. And this, I think, is such a picture of many father-son relationships when the sons are grown up and maybe have some tension, some conflict, some disagreement with their dads. That like at the heart of that, even though their dad, may be in the wrong, they both may be in the wrong, they're both things that both of them are not seeing, that like somewhere in the mix causing some of the emotion of that conflict is this root of love that the father has for his son, Now maybe that was not intended. Again, I think a lot of things I'm pulling from this, experiencing in reaction to this may not be intended, but nevertheless, I still find them very valuable and parallels that I find easy to make. So beautiful stuff there. BB's lullaby theme, expanding into this epic ballad on the journey to the incinerator. Man, I was crying. That's when it happened. I even knew, there was a part of me that's like, I know what kind of emotional, artistic moment they're creating here, but knowing that didn't help. I was crying on the walk to the incinerator. I knew they couldn't possibly end the game with BB dying. It was obvious with the conversation with Deadman that Sam was meant to try and take BB out of the pod. So I was like, they can't possibly, give us that nugget, give us that out, and not take advantage of it. But I was still in the moment with Sam, because for whatever reason, it wasn't clear to me that Sam was going to go that route, that Sam really saw that as a possibility. It wasn't absolutely clear how much Sam was attached to BB or Lou at this point. So I was still able to kind of be in the moment with him and just kind of wondering it was more about like wanting Sam to make that decision, wanting Sam to clearly come to that place of love for BB. The music at the end here took this simple, unadorned theme, this little lullaby, sung very quietly, very humbly by Mads Mikkelsen. Just a parent's voice singing to their child, an unimpressive parent's voice, just softly singing to their child. A very familiar kind of vibe and sound to parents. And then they took this theme that we'd heard bits and pieces of, we've heard it repeatedly over the course of the game, and then suddenly it expands into a full song with verses and a bridge and this beautiful music underscoring it, this sweeping epic anthem that I think mirrored I was trying to figure out, why am I reacting so emotionally to this? And I think it's because it mirrored the way a parent's love, expressed through simple little things like lullabies, can feel so huge and epic and all-encompassing when it's reflected on. Maybe in the little details of just singing a little lullaby and stuff like that, it's very simple in the moment, but when reflected on is just huge and so all-encompassing. And the way that journey to the incinerator takes you full circle, because one of the first missions you did was to take Bridget's body at the beginning. Maybe that was the first mission. You take Bridget's body to the incinerator at the beginning. And so this full circle moment suggested that this was the culmination of Sam's journey of being connected, starting from being connected to no one to then being so deeply connected to this child that he had adopted without saying so, was calling it by the name Lou, the name of his departed daughter from years past. You know, this baby traveling with Lou, or with Sam, had been both a huge blessing because of how it helped with BTs, but also a source of stress that was needy and maybe even irritating to lots of players. And yet when it comes down to it, we are meant in this moment to set aside all those difficulties and irritations at the obvious truth that this baby must not die. This baby is incredibly precious, and it better not end up in the incinerator, dang it! Now, I have to assume that this ending just won't be appreciated or felt in the same way by those who aren't parents, but it also gave me reason to reflect on God's love for me, his patience with me, and the lengths he has gone to so that I could be adopted by him and be with him forever. It's an epic story of love that stories like Death Stranding and real-life stories of loving fathers can ultimately only hint at. The more time I spend in Death Stranding, the more beautiful and meaningful parallels come to mind. Many, as I said, that probably aren't even intended, but that's the nature of how God created families and relationships to reflect who he is and who we are. So Death Stranding has been a rich and rewarding experience for me, and I hope it has been for you as well. And those are all of my thoughts for now on Death Stranding, the director's cut on the PlayStation 5. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.